The lawyer's voice crackled through my phone as I stood in the rain outside a decrepit warehouse in Portland, Oregon, staring at what my husband had apparently considered his final gift to me. Rusted corrugated metal walls, broken windows covered with plywood, and graffiti that would make a sailor blush. This was it. This was what Michael left me after 26 years of marriage and 18 months of secretly fighting the cancer that eventually took him. Not our savings, not the insurance money he'd promised, just this rotting industrial nightmare in a neighborhood that Google Maps literally labeled as under redevelopment, which I'd learned was code for barely habitable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But here's the thing about grief and rage and confusion all mixed together. They make you do stupid things. Like drive 3 hours from Seattle in a downpour because a mysterious key arrived in the mail with a note in Michael's handwriting that simply said, "Trust me, Elena." One last time. So there I stood, 52 years old, recently unemployed from the marketing firm that decided my position was redundant 3 weeks after Michael's funeral, holding a key that probably opened the door to absolutely nothing worth finding. Let me take you back 6 weeks to when this nightmare actually started, back when I thought the worst thing that could happen to me had already happened. Michael died on a Tuesday morning in April, quietly at home, exactly as he'd wanted. We'd been together since I was 26, met at a coffee shop where he'd spilled an entire latte on my laptop, and then spent the next 3 hours helping me recover my files while simultaneously asking me out 7 different times. He was persistent, brilliant, frustrating, and the kind of man who remembered every small detail about people but forgot to pay the electric bill 3 months running. He'd been a software engineer, the kind who worked from home in pajama pants and solved impossible problems while everyone else was still figuring out the question. We'd built a comfortable life in Seattle. Nothing extravagant but solid. A small house in Ballard with a garden I actually maintained. 2 cats named Algorithm and Bug, both orange tabbies who'd outlived their welcome, but somehow became family anyway. Weekend trips to the islands. Wednesday night dinners at the Thai place on the corner where they knew our order before we sat down. It was ordinary and perfect in mine. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, discovered almost accidentally during a routine checkup, for what Michael thought was persistent indigestion. The doctor's face when he delivered the news told us everything we needed to know before he even spoke. 6 months, maybe 8 with aggressive treatment. Michael chose quality over quantity, a decision I supported even as it destroyed me. He worked from home as long as he could, took experimental treatments that made him sick but gave us hope, and spent his final months putting affairs in order with the same methodical precision he applied to debugging code. Or so I thought. Turns out Michael had secrets. Big ones. The kind that don't reveal themselves until lawyers start reading wills and bank statements start arriving with balances that make no sense. Our savings account, the one I thought had about $40,000, contained $873. The life insurance policy he'd maintained religiously had lapsed 6 months before his death due to non-payment. The investment portfolio he'd mentioned casually over the years didn't exist, or if it did, nobody could find any record of it. What did exist was debt. Mountains of it. Medical bills that insurance had refused to cover. Credit cards I didn't know he'd opened. A second mortgage on our house that he'd taken out 2 years ago and never mentioned. The financial advisor, a nervous man named Gerald who couldn't meet my eyes, estimated I was looking at roughly $230,000 in debt, maybe more once all the bills came in. The house would have to be sold. Everything would have to be sold. I was numb during those meetings, sitting in Gerald's office with its generic motivational posters and dying spider plant, listening to him explain terms like liquidation and bankruptcy protection. Michael's sister Jennifer sat beside me, equally shocked, occasionally interjecting with questions I couldn't formulate. How had this happened? Where had the money gone? Michael was careful, methodical, the kind of person who color-coded his file folders and backed up his backups. This made no sense. That's when the lawyer, a woman named Patricia Cho with kind eyes and sensible shoes, pulled out the warehouse deed. It had been purchased 8 months before Michael's diagnosis, paid in full cash transaction. The property was in both our names, though I'd never seen the paperwork, never signed anything I could remember. Patricia assured me the signatures were legitimate, notarized, legally binding. The warehouse was mine now, free and clear. The only asset not drowning in debt or earmarked for creditors. Why would he buy a warehouse? I asked, my voice sounding distant even to myself. Patricia had shrugged apologetically. The deed didn't come with explanations, just an address in Portland's industrial district, and a property description that made it sound only slightly better than a condemned building. Current condition as is, buyer assumes all liability for contents and structure. Not exactly promising. Jennifer had been practical as always. Sell it, she'd said firmly. Whatever it's worth, take the money and use it to settle what you can. Start over. She wasn't wrong. Starting over at 52 with negative net worth and no job wasn't ideal, but it was survivable. People did it every day. I could move to a smaller city where rent was cheaper, find work, rebuild. The warehouse was probably worth something, even if just the land value. Portland real estate was unpredictable, but generally trending upward. Maybe I'd get lucky. But then the key arrived. Federal Express, signature required, containing nothing but a single brass key and that note in Michael's distinctive handwriting. Trust me, Elena. One last time. I'd sat at my kitchen table for an hour, just holding that key, crying in a way I hadn't allowed myself to cry since his funeral. What was I supposed to trust? The man who'd left me financially ruined? The husband who'd kept secrets that were now destroying what little stability I had left? Or the Michael I'd known for 26 years, who'd loved me fiercely and completely, who'd held my hand through 2 miscarriages and my mother's death, who'd made me laugh even when he was dying? That's what brought me to Portland on a gray May afternoon, standing in the rain outside a building that looked like it should be featured in a documentary about urban decay. The neighborhood was exactly as unwelcoming as I'd imagined. Empty lots filled with weeds and shopping carts. A few other warehouses in various states of disrepair. A homeless encampment visible 2 blocks down under a freeway overpass. The kind of area where you don't leave valuables in your car, and you definitely don't wander around alone after dark. The warehouse itself was massive, easily 15,000 square feet if I was estimating correctly. 2 stories of corrugated metal and concrete, with loading docks that had seen better decades and a front entrance that looked like it had been kicked in and poorly repaired multiple times. The windows that weren't boarded up were broken, and several sections of the roof showed visible damage. The whole structure leaned slightly to the left in a way that probably violated numerous building codes. I approached the door cautiously, key in hand, half expecting it to not even fit. But it slid in smoothly, turned with a solid click, and the door swung open on hinges that had clearly been recently oiled. That was the first surprise. The second was that the interior was completely dark, no natural light penetrating the boarded windows, and my phone flashlight revealed only a small entryway with another door ahead. The air smelled wrong. Not the musty abandonment smell I'd expected, but something else. Clean, almost sterile, with an undertone of something mechanical. I found a light switch next to the inner door, expecting nothing, but fluorescent lights flickered to life overhead, revealing a small vestibule with concrete floors and walls that had been recently painted white. There was a keypad next to the inner door, industrial grade, the kind you'd see at a secure facility. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to call Jennifer, to tell someone where I was, what I was seeing, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I was in a metal box in an industrial wasteland. For a moment I considered leaving, getting back in my car, driving home, and just letting the lawyers sell this place sight unseen. Whatever Michael had hidden here, whatever secrets this building contained, maybe I didn't want to know. But I'd driven 3 hours in the rain. I'd buried my husband, lost my job, faced financial ruin, and survived all of it. I could face whatever was behind this door. I tried my birthday on the keypad. Nothing. Our anniversary. Nothing. Then, on impulse, I tried the date Michael was diagnosed, the day our lives had changed forever. The keypad beeped, and the heavy door unlocked with a pneumatic hiss. The space beyond took my breath away. The entire warehouse had been converted into something extraordinary. The first floor was an open workshop that looked like it belonged in a tech company's research and development department. Sleek workbenches with high-end computers, 3D printers, laser cutters, and equipment I couldn't even identify. The walls were lined with shelving containing components, tools, and materials organized with the precision I recognized as distinctly Michael's. Everything was clean, maintained, clearly in use until recently. But it was the second floor that made me understand finally what Michael had been doing with our money, our future, and the last years of his life. I climbed the metal stairs slowly, my footsteps echoing in the vast space, and found myself in what could only be described as a living museum of innovation. 20 different workstations, each one dedicated to a different project, each one marked with a name and a story. The first station I approached had a placard that read Marcus Chan, age 19, dream, renewable energy storage. The workbench was covered with battery prototypes and testing equipment. Next to it was a binder filled with documentation, patent applications, test results, and a letter from Marcus thanking someone named Ghost for believing in him when nobody else would. There was a photo of a young Asian man holding what looked like a revolutionary battery design, beaming at the camera. I moved to the next station. Yolanda Rodriguez, age 34, dream, adaptive prosthetics for children.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
This one had 3D printed limbs in various sizes, each one more sophisticated than the last, with joint mechanisms that looked like they belonged in a science fiction film. Another binder, more letters, photos of children wearing these prosthetics, running, playing, living. More thanks to Ghost. Station after station, I walked through Michael's secret life. Amir Hassan, water purification systems for developing nations. Claire Wong, affordable hearing aids. James Okoye, agricultural technology for small farmers. 15 different people, 15 different dreams, all funded, supported, and mentored by my husband under a pseudonym that protected his identity but not his impact. In the center of the second floor was Michael's personal workspace, and this is where I finally broke down. His desk was exactly as he would have left it, organized chaos that made perfect sense to him and no one else. But what destroyed me was the wall behind his desk, covered in photos. Us at our wedding, young and stupid with joy. Vacations we'd taken. Quiet moments at home. And mixed in with our photos were pictures of all the people he'd helped. Marcus at his college graduation. Yolanda with her daughter who was wearing one of the prosthetics. Claire at a medical mission in rural Cambodia, distributing the hearing aids. On his desk was a laptop closed with a sticky note attached. For Elena. The password was our wedding date. I sat in his chair in this secret workshop he'd built, and opened the computer with trembling hands. The desktop contained a single folder labeled Start Here. Inside was a video file dated 3 weeks before he died. I clicked it and Michael's face filled the screen. Gaunt from the cancer but smiling in that way that had always made my heart skip. Elena, he began, his voice weak but clear. If you're watching this, you found the warehouse and you're probably furious with me. You have every right to be. I bankrupted us. I lied to you. I hid this entire part of my life for years. And I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, but I need you to understand why. He paused, coughing, taking a sip of water from a mug I recognized from our kitchen. When I was diagnosed, he continued, I had a choice. I could spend my remaining time being angry at the universe for cutting my life short, or I could try to make the time I had left mean something more than just my own loss. I chose the latter, and yes, I chose it without consulting you, which was wrong. But Elena, I knew you'd try to talk me out of it. You'd have been practical, sensible, told me we needed to secure our future, your future. And you'd have been right. But here's what I couldn't say to you then, what I can barely say now. I was dying and there was nothing I could do about that. But these people, these brilliant, desperate people with ideas that could change lives, they were dying too. Dying professionally. Financially, their dreams suffocating under student debt and lack of access. And a system that only funds innovation when it promises immediate profit. I couldn't save myself, Elena, but I could save them. He leaned back in his chair, the one I was sitting in now, and I could see the warehouse behind him in the video. Every person you see represented here came to me through various channels. Online forums, university programs, random encounters. They all had two things in common. Genuine brilliance and absolutely no resources. I gave them equipment, workspace, funding, and most importantly, time. Time to develop their ideas without worrying about rent or student loans or feeding their families. The money I spent, and yes, it was everything we had and more, has already generated returns. Marcus's battery design was licensed to a major manufacturer 6 months ago. He's made over $2 million, and per our agreement, half of that comes back to fund the next innovator. Yolanda's prosthetics are being manufactured at cost by a non-profit she founded. Claire's hearing aids have reached over 10,000 people in 12 countries. Every single person I invested in has either succeeded or is on the verge of succeeding, and every success funds the next dream. Michael paused again, and I could see tears in his eyes. I set this up as a self-sustaining foundation, Elena. The warehouse is paid for. The equipment is owned outright. There's an operating fund that should last 5 years even without new incoming revenue. And with the licensing deals and partnerships already in place, it should be self-sufficient indefinitely. But it needs someone to run it. Someone to find the next Marcus, the next Yolanda. Someone who understands that innovation isn't about profit margins, it's about potential. I need that someone to be you. I know you're thinking you're not qualified, that you don't understand engineering or technology or any of this. But Elena, you understand people. You always have. That's why you were so good at marketing, because you could see what people needed before they knew they needed it. These innovators don't need another engineer. They need someone who can see their potential, support their journey, and help them navigate the impossible path from idea to reality. Everything you need to know is on this computer. Financial records, legal documents, contacts, ongoing projects. There's also a letter from Patricia Cho explaining the foundation structure and your role as director. The salary is modest but livable. The house in Seattle, I'm so sorry, Elena, but it had to be sacrificed. But there's a small apartment above this workspace, fully furnished, rent-free. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it. He leaned forward, looking directly into the camera, directly at me. I know I'm asking the impossible. I'm asking you to forgive me for destroying our financial security. I'm asking you to uproot your life and move to Portland. I'm asking you to dedicate yourself to a mission you never signed up for. And I'm asking you to do it all while grieving, while angry, while probably hating me just a little bit. But Elena, love of my life, if you can find it in yourself to say yes, if you can take this leap of faith one last time, I promise you won't regret it. This work, these people, this mission, it gave my final years meaning beyond the cancer, beyond the dying. It made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt since we were young, and everything seemed possible. And I hope it could do the same for you. The video ended with Michael simply looking at the camera, love and hope and apology all mixed in his expression, and then the screen went black. I sat there in his chair, in his secret warehouse, surrounded by the evidence of his hidden life, and I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, the betrayal, the grief, all of it churning together into something I didn't have a name for. But underneath it all was something else. Curiosity. Possibility. The faint, terrifying whisper of hope. I spent the next 3 hours exploring every inch of the warehouse. The apartment Michael mentioned was accessed through a door at the far end of the second floor. It was small, maybe 600 square feet, but beautifully designed with an open layout, modern kitchen, and floor-to-ceiling windows that had been hidden behind the exterior boards. The windows overlooked the city, and from this height, even this rough neighborhood looked almost beautiful in the fading light. The apartment was furnished simply but thoughtfully. A comfortable couch, a real bed with quality linens, a desk, a small dining table. The kitchen was stocked with non-perishables, and I found a note taped to the refrigerator in Michael's handwriting with a list of recommended grocery stores and restaurants in the area. There was a washer and dryer in a closet. High-speed internet that actually worked. It was livable, more than livable. It was a home, or could be. Back downstairs, I found the financial records Michael had mentioned. The foundation was called Phoenix Innovations, incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit with myself listed as founder and director. There was an operating budget that took my breath away. The current balance was just over $400,000, with projected income from licensing deals and partnerships estimated at $200,000 annually. It wasn't a fortune, but it was sustainable. The salary listed for the director position was $65,000 a year. Not Seattle tech money, but more than enough to live on, especially with free housing. There were health benefits, a retirement account, even a modest travel budget for finding and visiting potential innovators. Michael had thought of everything, planned for everything except getting my permission. I found files on each of the people he'd helped. Detailed background checks, project proposals, progress reports, and follow-up communications. Michael had been meticulous, documenting everything, creating a template that could be replicated. There was even a file labeled future candidates with preliminary research on 15 other innovators who'd reached out or been identified through various channels. One folder was labeled Elena, New Beginnings. Inside was a detailed manual Michael had written, explaining not just how to run the foundation but why. His philosophy on identifying genuine innovation versus hype. How to structure agreements that protected both the foundation and the innovator. Warning signs of projects that would drain resources without producing results. It was essentially a masterclass in Michael's methodology, written specifically for me, knowing I'd have no formal training in any of this. There was also a personal letter, handwritten, that must have taken him days to compose given how weak he'd been near the end. My dearest Elena, it began. I've tried to write this letter a dozen times, and every version feels inadequate. How do you apologize for destroying someone's financial security while simultaneously asking them to take over your life's work? There's no good way, so I'll just be honest. I fell in love with this project the way I fell in love with you, completely irrationally knowing it would change everything. Just like marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Even though I was terrified and completely unprepared, I believe this foundation is the best thing I've ever built. And just like our marriage, it only works if you choose to be part of it. I can't force you, shouldn't force you. But I'm hoping, praying really, that when you see what we've accomplished, what we could accomplish, you'll give it a chance. If you decide to walk away, I understand. Patricia has instructions to liquidate everything, settle what debts can be settled, and provide you with whatever remains. It won't be much, maybe 30 or 40,000 after everything is sold and processed, but it's something. You could start over, find a new job, build a different life. No one would blame you. But if you stay, if you take this on, I need you to know what you're getting into. This isn't a hobby or a part-time project. These innovators, they need real support, real commitment. You'll be working long hours, dealing with complicated personalities, managing limited resources, and constantly fighting against systems that don't value what we're trying to do. It's exhausting and frustrating and occasionally heartbreaking when projects fail or people let you down. It's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Watching Marcus present his battery design to investors, seeing Yolanda fit a child with a prosthetic that let her play soccer for the first time, reading emails from people whose lives were changed by Claire's hearing aids, Elena. Those moments made every sacrifice worth it. Every dollar spent, every secret kept, every difficult decision, all of it was worth it to know that my life, even cut short, had ripple effects that would continue long after I was gone. That's what I'm offering you. Not financial security, not an easy path, but a chance to create ripples of your own. You've always been the person who saw potential in others, who believed in people when they couldn't believe in themselves. You did it for me every day of our marriage, and I watched you do it for friends, colleagues, even strangers. This is just a bigger canvas for that same gift. I love you, Elena. I loved you when I was alive. I love you as I write this knowing my time is running out. And I'll love you from wherever I end up after this is over. That love is the foundation of everything I've built here. The warehouse, the projects, the foundation, all of it is my way of saying that our life together meant something, that we can mean something beyond just the two of us. Trust me one last time. Please. The letter was signed simply Michael, with a small heart drawn next to his name. The same doodle he'd put on every note he'd ever left me. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the folder, and sat in the growing darkness of the warehouse, letting the weight of his request settle over me. He'd destroyed our savings, mortgaged our home, left me in debt and unemployed. But he'd also created something extraordinary, something that was continuing to change lives even after his death. The anger I felt wasn't gone, might never be fully gone, but it was competing now with something else. The recognition that Michael had seen something in me that I'd stopped seeing in myself. Potential. Purpose. The ability to make a difference beyond marketing campaigns and quarterly profits. I pulled out my phone, intending to call Jennifer, to talk through this impossible decision with someone practical and grounded. But there was still no signal. I'd have to go outside, back to my car, back to the rain and the real world where this all seemed crazy and impossible. Instead, I opened my laptop and started reading through the files more carefully, learning about each innovator, understanding their journey from desperate hope to realized dream. Marcus Chun had been a college dropout, brilliant but broke, working 3 jobs to send money home to his immigrant parents while trying to perfect his battery design in a shared apartment with no proper workspace. Michael had found him through an engineering forum, recognized the genius in his work, and offered him unlimited access to the warehouse and its equipment. 3 years later, Marcus had a patent, a licensing deal, and was completing his degree at MIT on full scholarship. Yolanda Rodriguez had been a single mother whose daughter was born without a fully formed left arm. The prosthetics available were either prohibitively expensive or poorly designed for children. Yolanda had taught herself 3D modeling and engineering through YouTube videos, but had no way to actually produce or test her designs. Michael had given her workspace, materials, and connections to pediatric specialists. Her daughter now wore a custom prosthetic that grew with her, and Yolanda's nonprofit was providing similar devices to hundreds of other children. Story after story, each one a testament to what was possible when someone believed in potential rather than credentials. Michael had seen these people, really seen them, and given them the one thing they needed most: a chance. And now he was asking me to continue that work, to be the one who saw the next Marcus, the next Yolanda, and gave them their chance. I don't know how long I sat there, reading and thinking and wrestling with the magnitude of what Michael had done and what he was asking me to do. Eventually, I heard rain starting to hammer on the metal roof, and I realized it was fully dark outside. I'd been in the warehouse for over 5 hours. Jennifer was probably worried. The cats needed feeding. I had a 3-hour drive home through a storm. But I didn't leave. Instead, I went to the apartment, found sheets in a closet, and made up the bed. I ordered Thai food delivery, amazed that it actually arrived despite the neighborhood. I took a hot shower in the surprisingly nice bathroom, put on clothes from an overnight bag I'd thrown in my car on impulse, and sat on the couch with my laptop, continuing to read through Michael's files. Around midnight, I found a folder labeled Elena's first project. Inside was a proposal from someone named Kenji Tanaka, a 27-year-old engineer working on water filtration systems for disaster relief. His design was innovative, cheap to produce, and could literally save lives. Michael had evaluated the project 3 weeks before he died, marked it as high potential, but hadn't had time to reach out. The file included contact information and a note. "This one's for you, Elena. Trust your instincts." I stared at that note for a long time, feeling the weight of it. This wasn't just about continuing Michael's work. It was about making it my own, bringing my own judgment and instincts to these decisions. The thought was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. I'd spent 26 years building a life with Michael, supporting his dreams, managing our home, climbing the corporate ladder in a career I'd never really loved. And now at 52, he was asking me to burn it all down and start over with something completely different. The smart choice was obvious. Go home, sell the warehouse, settle the debts, find a sensible job in marketing or communications, rebuild my retirement fund, live a safe, predictable life. That's what Jennifer would tell me to do. That's what any financial advisor would recommend. That's what the old Elena, the careful Elena, would have done without question. But I wasn't sure I was that Elena anymore. Grief changes you, strips away the pretense, and leaves you with only what's real. And sitting in that warehouse, surrounded by evidence of lives changed and dreams realized, I felt more real, more present, more alive than I had in years. Maybe that was just the adrenaline and shock talking. Maybe in the morning, I'd come to my senses and realize this was all crazy. But that night, in Michael's secret workshop, in the home he'd built for a future he'd never see, I made a decision. I opened my laptop, found Kenji Tanaka's contact information, and sent him an email. "Dear Mr. Tanaka," I began. "My name is Elena Morrison, and I'm the Director of Phoenix Innovations. I've reviewed your proposal for portable water filtration systems, and I'd like to discuss the possibility of supporting your project. Would you be available for a video call this week?" I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then sat back and laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in the empty apartment. What was I doing? I had no idea how to evaluate an engineering project. No idea how to run a foundation. No idea how to be the person Michael thought I could be. But I'd sent the email and there was no taking it back now. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Are you okay? You said you'd call hours ago. I'm worried." I typed back quickly. "I'm fine. Staying in Portland tonight. Long story. Talk tomorrow." Her response came immediately. "Staying where? That warehouse isn't safe, Elena. Come home." I looked around the comfortable apartment, at the city lights visible through the windows, At the workshop floor below filled with equipment and possibility. Home, I realized, was becoming a complicated concept. The house in Seattle hadn't felt like home since Michael died. This warehouse, this impossible gift, was starting to feel like something else. A beginning, maybe. Or an ending. Possibly both. I'm safe, I texted back. Promise. We'll talk tomorrow. Then I turned off my phone before she could argue, poured myself a glass of wine I found in the kitchen, obviously placed there by Michael for this exact moment, and toasted the empty room. To trust, I said aloud. To faith. To completely insane decisions made in the middle of the night. To you, Michael, you brilliant, frustrating man. I hope you're right about this. I really hope you're right. The wine was good, expensive, another detail Michael had gotten right. I finished the glass, crawled into bed, and fell asleep in a warehouse in Portland, surrounded by other people's dreams, trying to figure out if I had the courage to make them my own. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten weren't boarded up from the inside, momentarily disoriented by the industrial ceiling beams and the distant sound of traffic that was distinctly not Seattle. Reality crashed back in waves. The warehouse. Michael's secret. The email I'd sent at midnight to a stranger about water filtration systems I knew nothing about. The decision I'd apparently made while exhausted and emotionally compromised to completely upend what remained of my life. My phone showed 7 missed calls from Jennifer, and a string of increasingly concerned texts. There was also an email response from Kenji Tanaka, sent at 6 in the morning, which meant he'd either been up all night or was pathologically punctual. Ms. Morrison, thank you for reaching out. I've been hoping to hear from Phoenix Innovations since I submitted my proposal 4 months ago. I'm available for a call anytime this week. I have to admit, I'm surprised and grateful. Most foundations never respond at all. For months. Michael had received this proposal 4 months ago, right around the time his condition had started deteriorating rapidly. He'd flagged it as important but hadn't had the strength or time to follow through. And now this young engineer had been waiting, hoping, probably applying to dozens of other programs and getting rejected or ignored. The weight of that responsibility hit me hard. My response could change this person's entire trajectory. I made coffee in the apartment's small kitchen, using beans I found in the freezer that were probably Michael's last purchase, and tried to think practically about what I was considering. If I actually took this on, if I moved to Portland and became director of Phoenix Innovations, I'd need to make real decisions about real money that would affect real people's lives. The foundation had resources, yes, but they were finite. Every dollar spent on one project was a dollar not spent on another. Every person I chose to support meant turning someone else away. Michael had made this look easy in his files, his evaluations crisp and logical, his reasoning clear. But Michael had been a software engineer with decades of experience evaluating technical projects. I'd spent my career in marketing, selling products I didn't create to people who didn't need them. What qualified me to judge whether Kenji Tanaka's water filtration design was revolutionary or just another well-intentioned failure? I was spiraling, I recognized that. This was how my brain worked when overwhelmed, finding every possible reason why something was a bad idea instead of considering whether it might actually be possible. Jennifer called it my catastrophic thinking mode. Michael had called it my planning phase. He'd learned to wait it out, let me work through all the worst-case scenarios until I'd exhausted my capacity for worry and could think clearly again. So I sat on the couch with my coffee and my laptop and worked through it systematically. Worst-case scenario. I moved to Portland, tried to run the foundation, made terrible decisions, wasted all the money, and ended up exactly where I'd be if I sold everything anyway. Broke, unemployed, starting over. Best-case scenario. I actually managed to continue Michael's work, helped people achieve their dreams, created something meaningful with my life, and maybe, possibly, found a way forward through the grief that had been suffocating me for months. The middle scenarios were harder to map. Partial success. Learning on the job. Making mistakes but recovering from them. Building something that wasn't as good as what Michael had created but was still worthwhile. Those felt more realistic than either extreme, and oddly they felt manageable. I'd built a 20-year marketing career by learning on the job, making mistakes, and adapting. Why should this be different? Because the stakes are higher, my anxious brain supplied. Because these are people's dreams, not product launches. Because Michael trusted you with his legacy, and what if you destroy it? I took a breath and did something Michael had taught me during my mother's final illness when I'd been paralyzed by similar fears. I asked myself what the most loving response would be. Not the safest or the smartest, but the most loving. To myself, to Michael's memory, to the people whose proposals sat in those files waiting for someone to believe in them. The most loving response was to try. To honor what Michael had built by continuing it as best I could. To give myself permission to learn and fail and grow. To take the leap he'd asked me to take, trusting that he'd known me well enough to believe I could do this. I finished my coffee, opened my laptop and replied to Kenji. I'm available for a video call today at 2 p.m. Pacific time if that works for you. I look forward to learning more about your project. Then I called Jennifer before I could change my mind. She answered on the first ring. Her voice tight with worry that immediately shifted to relief then irritation. Elena, what the hell? You can't just disappear like that without explanation. I've been imagining you dead in that horrible neighborhood. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. I needed time to think and I knew you'd try to talk me out of staying. Staying? Elena, please tell me you didn't sleep in that warehouse. You don't know if it's structurally sound, if there's mold or asbestos or squatters or anything. Safe, I assured her. Actually, it's more than safe. Jen, I need to tell you what I found here. And I need you to listen without immediately telling me I'm being crazy. The silence on the other end was skeptical but willing. I spent the next 30 minutes describing everything. The workshop, the innovators, the foundation, Michael's video and letter, the apartment, the decision I was considering. When I finished, Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then she said carefully, I understand why this is appealing. Michael built something good here, something meaningful. But Elena, you can't take this on out of guilt or grief or some misguided sense of obligation to finish his work. You have to make this decision based on what's right for your life, your future. I know, I said. And I am. Jen, I've been thinking about my life in Seattle, about going back to marketing, about starting over with the same kind of career I never really loved in the first place. And it feels like walking backward. This feels like moving forward. Moving forward into what? She challenged. You don't know anything about running a foundation. You don't know Portland. You don't have any support system there. You'd be completely alone, trying to do something you're completely unqualified for, living in a neighborhood that's basically industrial wasteland. When you put it that way, it sounds terrible, I admitted. But when I look at what Michael accomplished here, when I read about the people he helped, when I think about the difference I could make if I'm even partially as good at this as he was, it feels like maybe the first meaningful thing I've done in years. Jennifer sighed, and I could picture her sitting in her pristine kitchen in Bellevue, probably wearing workout clothes and drinking a green smoothie, trying to figure out how to save her irrational sister-in-law from herself. What about the debt? The house has to be sold regardless. The creditors aren't going to just go away because you moved to Portland. I know. Patricia is handling all of that. The foundation is protected as a separate legal entity. My personal bankruptcy won't affect it. The house sale will cover most of what I owe. And Patricia thinks we can negotiate settlements on the rest. So you'd be starting over with literally nothing. No savings, bad credit, in a new city where you know no one. Yes, I said. But I'd have a job, housing, health insurance, and a purpose. That's more than I have right now. The job pays $65,000. That's a significant pay cut from what you were making. I don't need much, I countered. No rent, no car payment once I sell mine and get something cheaper. Portland's less expensive than Seattle. I could actually live on that salary and maybe even start rebuilding savings eventually. What if you fail? Jennifer asked, not cruelly, just practically. What if you're terrible at this and waste all the foundation's money in 6 months? Then I'll have tried, I said. And I'll figure out what comes next. But Jen, I've been failing at life for the past 6 months anyway. Failing at processing grief, failing at job hunting, failing at imagining any kind of future. At least this is a new kind of failing. Her laugh was reluctant but genuine. That's possibly the most depressing pep talk I've ever heard. But I understand. I don't agree, I think you're making a huge mistake, but I understand. Will you at least come visit? I asked. Make sure I haven't been murdered by warehouse squatters? I'll come this weekend, she said firmly. And I'm bringing a contractor friend to assess whether that building is actually safe, or if Michael's grand gesture is going to literally collapse on your head. Fair enough, I agreed. Thank you for not immediately staging an intervention. The day's not over yet, she said, but there was warmth in her voice now. I love you, Elena. Please be careful. I love you too. I'll call you tonight. After we hung up, I spent the morning exploring the warehouse more thoroughly in daylight. The first floor workshop was even more impressive than I'd realized. Michael had clearly invested heavily in quality equipment. The 3D printers were industrial grade, capable of producing both plastic and metal components. The laser cutter could handle materials from paper to steel. There were multiple workstations with high-end computers running design software, testing equipment for electronics, a small machine shop with precision tools, and a materials library that would make a university engineering department jealous. But what struck me most was how personal Michael had made each innovator's space. Marcus Chen's workstation had a photo of his parents and a certificate from his first patent proudly displayed. Yolanda Rodriguez's area included crayon drawings from her daughter and thank you cards from families who'd received prosthetics. Each space told a story of who these people were beyond their innovations, and I realized that's what Michael had understood that most funding programs missed. These weren't just projects to be evaluated. They were human beings with lives and struggles and dreams that extended far beyond their technical work. I found a filing cabinet in Michael's workspace that contained the physical proposals, each one carefully organized with his notes and evaluation criteria. His system was actually fairly straightforward once I understood it. He'd assess 4 main factors: technical feasibility, social impact potential, the innovator's commitment level, and something he called collaborative readiness, which seemed to mean the person's ability to accept mentorship and work with others. He'd given each proposal a score in these 4 categories, but I noticed that the scores weren't the determining factor in who he'd chosen to support. There were several high-scoring proposals marked as passed, and a few lower-scoring ones marked as funded with notes like "gut says yes" or "something special here." Michael had trusted his instincts as much as his analysis, and he was asking me to do the same. At 1:30, I set up my laptop in Michael's workspace for the video call with Kenji Tanaka. I'd spent the previous hour reviewing his proposal, trying to understand enough about water filtration to ask intelligent questions. His design was for a portable system that used a combination of ceramic filters and UV sterilization, powered by a hand crank that also doubled as the pumping mechanism. According to his calculations, it could purify enough water for a family of 4 for an entire day with just 15 minutes of cranking. The genius was in the simplicity and durability. Most disaster relief filtration systems required replacement parts that were hard to source in crisis situations. Kenji's design used materials that could be repaired or replaced with basic tools and components available almost anywhere. He'd tested prototypes in his garage, documenting everything meticulously, but he needed funding to produce enough units for field testing in actual disaster zones and to refine the manufacturing process for scale production. When the video call connected at exactly 2 p.m., I found myself looking at a young Japanese-American man with tired eyes and an eager expression. He was sitting in what appeared to be a cluttered garage workshop, wearing a t-shirt from a robotics competition and holding a battered notebook. "Ms. Morrison, thank you so much for this opportunity," he began. I have to admit, I'd given up hope of hearing from Phoenix Innovations. When I saw that when the program founder passed away, I assumed the foundation would close. Ghost was Michael's pseudonym, I explained, and he was my husband. I'm very new to this, so I appreciate your patience as I learn the process. "I'm sorry for your loss," Kenji said, and I could see genuine sympathy in his face. From what I've heard through the community, Ghost helped a lot of people. His legacy is incredible. "Thank you," I said, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that came with every acknowledgement of Michael's death. "He flagged your proposal as high priority before he passed. Tell me about your water filtration system, why this design and why now?" Kenji's entire demeanor changed when he started talking about his work. The nervousness disappeared, replaced by focused passion. He explained how he'd volunteered with disaster relief organizations during college, and had seen firsthand how contaminated water killed people, even after the immediate crisis had passed. He'd watched families spend hours boiling water over open fires, using precious fuel and time, or risk illness by drinking untreated water, because they had no better options. The existing solutions were either too expensive, too fragile, or too dependent on replacement parts and electricity. He'd spent 3 years designing something that addressed all those problems, testing it obsessively, breaking it and rebuilding it to find points of failure. He'd created a system that could survive being dropped, submerged, even partially damaged and still function. The parts were standardized and could be manufactured locally in many developing countries. The entire unit cost less than $60 to produce. But here's what really matters, he said, pulling up a presentation on his screen. I've calculated that if we can get this into production and partner with relief organizations, we could provide clean water to over 50,000 people in the first year alone. That's 50,000 people who won't die from cholera or dysentery. 50,000 children who won't miss school because they're sick. The ripple effects are impossible to fully calculate, but they're enormous. What do you need to make that happen? I asked. He pulled out his battered notebook, clearly having anticipated this question. Funding to produce 500 test units for field trials. That's about $30,000. Another $20,000 for materials and components to refine the design based on field feedback. Travel costs to visit 3 target countries and work with local partners maybe $10,000. And workspace and equipment to actually manufacture the units, which is where Phoenix Innovations is perfect because you already have everything I'd need. What about your living expenses? I asked. How are you supporting yourself right now? His expression became guarded. I work night shifts at a warehouse 4 nights a week. It pays enough to cover rent and food. I do the filtration work during the day when I'm not too tired. I sleep when I can. That's not sustainable, I said. If Phoenix supports your project, we'd cover basic living expenses so you can work on this full time. That's part of what the foundation does. I watched his eyes fill with tears. He blinked rapidly, clearly trying to maintain composure. I'm sorry, he said. It's just I've been doing this for so long on no sleep and no money and everyone telling me it's a waste of time. The idea of actually being able to focus on just this, it's overwhelming. I understood that feeling more than he knew. Tell me about your timeline. If you had full funding and support, how long until you have field-ready units? He consulted his notebook again. With dedicated work time and access to proper equipment, I could have the initial 500 units produced in 3 months. Field testing would take another 6 months to a year depending on partner organization schedules and logistics. Based on that feedback, I'd refine the design maybe another 2 months. Then we'd be ready for larger scale production and distribution. And you've already made contact with potential partner organizations? Yes, he said eagerly, pulling up another document. I've been in communication with 3 different NGOs that work in disaster relief. They're all interested in testing the system. I also have preliminary interest from a manufacturer in Vietnam, who could produce the units at scale once the design is finalized. He's willing to do initial production at cost if we can prove the concept works. I asked him questions for another 40 minutes, some technical that I barely understood, some practical about his process and plans. But mostly I watched him the way Michael must have watched all his innovators. Kenji was exhausted, clearly pushing himself beyond sustainable limits, but he was also utterly committed. This wasn't about ego or profit for him. He genuinely believed he could save lives, and from what I could understand of his design, he was probably right. Finally, I said, I need to be honest with you. I've never done this before. I've never evaluated an engineering project or run a foundation or made decisions about this kind of funding. My husband built Phoenix Innovations and I'm trying to continue his work, but I'm learning as I go. So I can't make you any promises today. But I will review your proposal thoroughly, consult with people who understand the technical aspects better than I do, and give you an answer within 2 weeks. Is that acceptable? That's more than acceptable, Kenji said. Most programs take 6 months to respond if they respond at all. 2 weeks is incredibly fast. Thank you for even considering this. After the call ended, I sat staring at my laptop screen trying to process what I'd just done. I'd essentially interviewed someone for a $60,000 investment without having any real authority to make that investment yet. I hadn't officially accepted the position as foundation director. I hadn't even decided for certain that I was moving to Portland, but I'd acted as if both those decisions were already made, and somehow that felt right. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching water filtration systems, disaster relief logistics, and previous similar projects. I found reviews of competing products, academic papers on water purification methods, and case studies from NGOs about what worked and what didn't in field conditions. The more I learned, the more Kenji's design seemed genuinely innovative. It addressed real problems in practical ways, and his cost projection seemed conservative if anything. But I also found examples of well-intentioned projects that had failed spectacularly despite seeming promising. Filters that broke in actual field conditions. Designs that worked in laboratories but couldn't be manufactured at scale. Systems that were technically sound but culturally inappropriate for the communities they were meant to serve. The graveyard of failed humanitarian innovations was extensive and sobering. I needed advice and I couldn't ask Michael. That reality hit me hard as it did multiple times every day. Michael would have known exactly how to evaluate this project. He would have understood the technical details I was struggling with, known which risks were acceptable and which were fatal. I was operating blind, relying on instinct and internet research, and that felt terrifyingly inadequate. Then I remembered something from Michael's files. Contact lists. He'd maintained relationships with experts in various fields, people he'd consulted when evaluating projects outside his core expertise. I found the list in a folder labeled Brain Trust, and there, under Water and Sanitation, was a name. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, Professor of Environmental Engineering at Portland State University. Michael's note said she's brilliant, generous with her time, and has extensive field experience. Consulted on the Hassan Water Purification Project. I looked up Dr. Okonkwo's university profile. She'd spent 20 years working on water systems in sub-Saharan Africa, held multiple patents for purification technologies, and advised several NGOs on disaster relief systems. She was exactly the kind of expert I needed, but why would she agree to help a complete stranger evaluate someone's proposal? I drafted an email anyway, explaining who I was, my connection to Phoenix Innovations, and asking if she might be willing to review Kenji's design and offer her professional opinion. I hit send expecting nothing, or at best a polite refusal, and was shocked when she replied within an hour. Elena, I was so sorry to hear about Michael's passing. He consulted me on several projects over the years, and I always appreciated his approach to innovation funding. I'd be happy to review the Tanaka proposal. Can you send me the technical specifications? Also, I'm actually free tomorrow afternoon if you'd like to meet in person. I'm curious about the foundation's future plans. Tomorrow afternoon I found myself typing back. That would be wonderful. The foundation is in Northwest Portland. I can send you the address. Her response was immediate. I know where it is. Michael gave me a tour about 2 years ago. Incredible facility. See you tomorrow at 2? See you then, I confirmed and sat back slightly stunned. Michael had been building networks and relationships I knew nothing about. How many other people had he connected with, shared his vision with, brought into this secret project? And how many of them were waiting to see what would happen to Phoenix Innovations now that he was gone? That evening I walked around the neighborhood, wanting to understand the area beyond my initial impression of urban decay. It was still rough, no question about that. But I also found a decent grocery store 3 blocks away, a coffee shop that looked surprisingly hipster, and a community garden tucked behind a chain-link fence where someone was growing impressive tomatoes. The homeless encampment I'd noticed earlier was still there. But as I walked past, a woman sitting outside a tent wished me good evening, and I found myself stopping to talk. Her name was Crystal, and she'd been living on the streets for 8 months after a series of catastrophic bad luck. Lost her job, couldn't pay rent, got evicted, and once you're homeless in Portland, she explained, it's almost impossible to climb back out. No address means no job. No job means no apartment. The cycle just keeps going. She asked what I was doing in the neighborhood, and I found myself telling her a simplified version of the truth. My husband left me a building nearby. I'm thinking about moving here. That warehouse with all the lights? She asked. Your husband was Ghost? I stared at her. You knew Michael? Not personally, but he helped my nephew. Kid's brilliant, wanted to study engineering but couldn't afford college. Ghost gave him workspace and equipment, mentored him, helped him get scholarships. Last I heard, my nephew's at Oregon State doing great. Your husband was a good man. Thank you, I said, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. He was. Crystal looked at me appraisingly. You planning to keep doing what he did? Helping people? I'm thinking about it. Good, she said firmly. World needs more of that. Less talk, more actual help. She was right, I realized. Michael hadn't talked about helping people. He'd just done it quietly without recognition or credit, because he believed it was the right thing to do. That's what he was asking me to do now. Not to have a perfect plan or complete expertise, but to just start helping and figure out the rest as I went. I walked back to the warehouse as the sun set, painting the industrial buildings in shades of orange and pink that were almost beautiful. Inside, I climbed to the apartment and made dinner from the groceries I'd bought, simple pasta and salad, eating while looking out at the city. This view would be mine if I stayed. This life would be mine, with all its uncertainty and possibility. My phone rang. "Jennifer, how's your second night in the death trap?" she asked. "Still alive," I reported. "Had a video call with a potential innovator today. Young guy with a water filtration design that could help thousands of people." "You had a video call?" Jennifer's tone was carefully neutral. "As in, you're already making decisions about the foundation?" "Not decisions yet, just gathering information. But Jen, his project is amazing. If I can help him succeed even a little bit, it could make a real difference." "And you know enough about water filtration to make that judgment?" she challenged. "No," I admitted. "But I'm meeting with an environmental engineering professor tomorrow who does. I'm not going to make any major decisions without expert advice." "That's actually smart," Jennifer said, sounding surprised. "Maybe you can do this." Maybe I agreed. Or maybe I'll fail spectacularly and end up living in my car. But at least I'll have tried. We talked for another hour, and I could hear her gradually accepting that I was really going to do this. She made me promise to let her help with the move, to stay in touch constantly, and to immediately tell her if anything felt wrong or unsafe. I agreed to all of it, grateful for her concern even when it felt suffocating. After we hung up, I opened Michael's laptop again and started reading through the other proposals in his future candidates file. There was Tanya Okoye, a woman from Nigeria working on solar-powered refrigeration for vaccines in rural clinics. Dmitry Volkov, a Russian immigrant designing low-cost earthquake sensors for developing nations. Jasmine Foster, an African-American woman from Detroit creating urban farming systems for food deserts. Each proposal represented someone's dream, someone's belief that they could solve a problem and make the world measurably better. The responsibility of choosing among them felt crushing. How could I possibly decide whose dream deserved support and whose didn't? Michael had made it look straightforward, but I knew it couldn't have been. Every person he'd turned away was another innovator left struggling, another potential breakthrough that might never happen. The weight of those decisions, of playing gatekeeper to people's futures, was enormous. But then I thought about Marcus Chen's battery design now powering devices worldwide. Yolanda Rodriguez's prosthetics letting children play and live normally. Claire Wong's hearing aids reaching people who'd never experienced sound. The ripples Michael had created by saying yes to just a few people were extraordinary. Maybe that was the answer. I couldn't help everyone, but I could help someone, and that someone would create their own ripples. I fell asleep that night reading proposals, dreaming about innovations and possibilities, and the strange new life I was apparently choosing. When I woke the next morning, the decision felt less like a question and more like an inevitability. I was going to stay. I was going to try. I was going to trust Michael one last time and hope he'd been right about me. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo arrived precisely at 2 p.m., a tall Nigerian woman with gray-streaked hair and an expression that was both warm and shrewdly assessing. She looked around the warehouse with obvious appreciation, running her hand along one of the work benches. "Michael maintained this beautifully," she said. "I've consulted for 3 university engineering departments that would kill for equipment like this." "Thank you for coming," I said, suddenly nervous about having my first real test as potential foundation director. "I really need your help understanding whether the Tanaka project is viable." "Show me what you have," she said, settling into one of the workspace chairs with the ease of someone used to evaluating technical documents. I pulled up Kenji's proposal on my laptop, and she spent the next 45 minutes reading through it in silence, occasionally making notes, sometimes pulling up additional references on her phone to check specifications or calculations. Finally, she looked up. "This is good work," she said simply. "Not perfect. There are some refinements I'd suggest, but the core design is sound. The materials choices are smart, the cost projections are realistic if anything slightly high, and the field testing plan is thorough. More importantly, I recognize genuine engineering thinking here. This person understands not just how things work in theory, but how they work in practice where everything is dusty and broken and nothing goes according to plan. So you think it's worth funding?" I asked, trying to hide how much her opinion mattered. I think it could save lives, Dr. Okonkwo said. But Elena, may I be frank with you? Of course. I've advised several foundation programs over the years, and I've seen brilliant innovations fail not because of technical problems but because of inadequate support and follow-through. The money is important, yes, but what these innovators really need is mentorship, connection to the right people, help navigating manufacturing and distribution logistics, someone who will answer emails at 2 a.m. when they hit a crisis and don't know what to do next. That's what made Michael's approach so effective. He didn't just write checks. He invested himself in these people's success. He made connections, opened doors, provided emotional support when projects seemed impossible. Can you do that? I don't know, I admitted. I'm not an engineer. I don't have Michael's technical knowledge or his network. But I care about people, and I'm good at solving problems, even if they're not technical problems. Is that enough? She smiled. Michael asked me the same thing when he first started Phoenix Innovations. He said he felt unqualified to judge people's dreams. I told him that the best innovations often come from people who don't know enough to understand why something should be impossible. The same applies to running this foundation. Your lack of formal expertise might actually be an advantage. You'll ask different questions, see different potential, connect with the human element in ways a pure technician might miss. That's generous of you to say. I'm not being generous, Dr. Okonkwo said firmly. I'm being honest. If you take on the Tanaka project, I'll volunteer to consult on the technical aspects. No fee, just because I believe in what you're doing and what Michael built here. I'll do the same for any water-related projects you evaluate in the future. That's how this works, Elena. People who care about innovation help each other because the alternative is letting good ideas die for lack of support. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Thank you. That means more than you know. She stood, preparing to leave, then paused. One more thing. Michael told me something shortly before he died. He said that Phoenix Innovations wasn't really about the innovations. It was about teaching people that their dreams were worth pursuing, that they were capable of more than they believed, that someone saw their potential even when the world didn't. That's what you're actually funding here. Not water filters or prosthetics or batteries, but human potential. If you can remember that, you'll do fine. After she left, I sat in Michael's workspace and thought about what she'd said. Human potential. That's what Michael had seen in all his innovators, and that's what he'd seen in me when he'd left this impossible gift. He'd believed I had the potential to continue his work, to grow into this role, to become someone who changed lives by believing in people. The question was whether I believed it myself. I pulled up Kenji Tanaka's contact information and sent him an email. After consulting with Dr. Sarah Okonkwo from Portland State's Environmental Engineering Department, I'm prepared to offer Phoenix Innovation support for your water filtration project. If you're still interested, we can discuss terms and timeline for beginning work. Please let me know your availability for a follow-up call. Then I opened a new document and titled it Phoenix Innovations Director's Log, Day 1. I wrote about finding the warehouse, Michael's video, the decision I was making, the call with Kenji, and the meeting with Dr. Okonkwo. I documented everything, creating a record of this journey for myself and maybe, eventually, for whoever came after me. Michael had left me his notebooks and files. I would leave the same for my eventual successor. Jennifer arrived on Friday with her contractor friend Mike, a bearded man who spent 2 hours examining every aspect of the warehouse's structure. His verdict was reassuring. Building solid, he announced. Roof needs some patching, electrical could use updating, but the bones are good. Whoever did the renovation knew what they were doing. This place will outlast all of us. How much for the roof repairs? I asked, already thinking about budgets. Few thousand, depends on how extensive. I can give you names of reliable contractors. Actually, he said, looking around appreciatively, if you're doing what Jennifer says you're doing here, helping inventors and such, I'd be willing to do the work at cost. Just materials, no labor charge. This is good work you're continuing. I seemed to be surrounded by people who wanted to help, I realized. Michael had built more than a foundation. He'd created a community of believers, people who'd caught his vision and wanted to be part of it. That community was offering to catch me now, to help me learn and grow into this impossible role. All I had to do was accept their help and try my best not to let them down. Jennifer and I spent the weekend moving my essential belongings from Seattle. The house had sold quickly to a family who loved it immediately. which felt like both a relief and a heartbreak. Watching strangers walk through rooms where Michael and I had lived our life together, imagining their future in our space, I felt the finality of everything changing. There was no going back now. This warehouse, this foundation, this new life was all I had. On Sunday evening, after Jennifer had left and I was alone again in the apartment, Kenji Tanaka called. He'd accepted my offer and would be arriving Monday morning to begin work. He sounded breathless with excitement and terror, asking if I was sure, if this was really happening, if he needed to bring anything specific. Just yourself, I told him. And your notebooks. Everything else you need is here. After we hung up, I walked down to the workshop floor and looked at the empty workstation I designated for Kenji. Tomorrow it would be occupied by someone whose life was about to change, whose dream was getting its chance, whose potential would finally have room to grow. I'd done that. Me, Elena Morrison, 52 years old, recently widowed, barely employed, completely unqualified, I'd done that. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I thought about Michael, wondered if he was watching somehow, if he was proud or worried or laughing at my fumbling attempts to fill his shoes. I hoped he was proud. I hoped he knew that I was trying, that I was trusting him one last time, that I was choosing love over fear and possibility over safety. That's what he'd done his entire life, and especially in his final months. He'd chosen to believe in people, to invest in dreams, to create ripples that would outlast him. Now it was my turn to create ripples. Starting tomorrow with one young engineer and a water filtration system that could save thousands of lives. It wasn't much compared to what Michael had accomplished, but it was a beginning. My beginning. And sometimes I was learning that's all you need. The courage to begin, the willingness to try, and the faith that the people you choose to believe in might just surprise everyone, including themselves. I went back to the apartment, made tea, and sat at the window watching the city lights. Somewhere out there were dozens of other innovators like Kenji, struggling alone, waiting for someone to believe in them. I couldn't help all of them, but I could help one. And then another. And another. One dream at a time, one leap of faith at a time, creating ripples that would spread farther than I could imagine. That's what Michael had understood. That's what he'd tried to teach me. And finally, standing in this warehouse he'd built, surrounded by evidence of dreams achieved and lives changed, I thought I was beginning to understand too. Innovation wasn't really about technology or engineering or brilliant designs. It was about belief. Believing in people when they couldn't believe in themselves. Giving them space and resources and support to become who they were meant to be. Michael had believed in me when I couldn't see my own potential. Now it was time to pay that forward, to become for others what he'd been for me, and for all the people whose workstations surrounded me. A believer, a supporter, a steady presence saying yes you can when the whole world was saying no you can't. I could do that, I realized. 6 months later, I stood in the warehouse watching Kenji demonstrate his water filtration system to representatives from 3 major humanitarian organizations. His hands moved confidently over the device, explaining modifications we'd made based on Dr. Okonkwo's suggestions and early field testing. The nervous young man from our first video call had transformed into someone assured and articulate, speaking about flow rates and bacterial reduction with the authority of an expert. The field tests had exceeded every projection. In a refugee camp in Uganda, Kenji's filters had provided clean water to over 2,000 people for 3 months without a single mechanical failure. The hand crank design proved so intuitive that children could operate it, and the repair rate was less than 2%. Local technicians had learned to maintain the systems using basic tools, exactly as intended. Lives had been saved, measurably and documentably. One of the organization representatives, a woman named Patricia from Water for All, approached me after the demonstration. We want to order 5,000 units for deployment across East Africa. Can Phoenix Innovations handle production at that scale? Not yet, I admitted, but we have manufacturing partners ready to scale up. Kenji has the relationships in place. We just need commitment from organizations like yours to justify the investment. Consider this our commitment, Patricia said, extending her hand. We'll send the purchase order next week. Your husband would be proud of what you've built here. He'd be proud of what Kenji built, I corrected. I just gave him the space to do it. That's exactly what I meant, she replied with a knowing smile. After everyone left, Kenji found me in Michael's old workspace, now officially mine, though I still thought of it as his. We did it, he said, still slightly stunned. 5,000 units. That's over 20,000 people who'll have clean water. More than that, I said. Those filters will last years. And once other organizations see the results, there'll be more orders. You've created something that will outlast both of us. He sat down, suddenly serious. I need to tell you something. I've been offered a position with Water for All. Good salary, benefits, chance to oversee implementation of the filters across multiple countries. I'm going to take it. Good, I said, meaning it. That's exactly what should happen. You've developed something important, and now you need to see it through to maximum impact. Phoenix got you started. Now it's time to fly. But I'll still consult for the foundation, he said quickly. Help evaluate other water projects, provide technical advice, whatever you need. And 10% of my salary goes back to Phoenix per our agreement. That money funds the next innovator. That's the deal. I appreciated his commitment to paying it forward, the principle Michael had built into every agreement. Success wasn't just about individual achievement, but about creating a cycle where each person's triumph enabled the next person's opportunity. 3 other innovators now occupied workstations in the warehouse. Tanya with her solar-powered vaccine refrigeration, making remarkable progress toward her first field installation in rural Nigeria. Dimitri refining his earthquake sensors with help from seismology professors Dr. Okonkwo had connected us with. And Jasmine, who transformed the empty lot next door into a demonstration urban farm that was already supplying produce to local food banks, while developing scalable models for other cities. The foundation's finances had stabilized better than I'd hoped. Kenji's manufacturing contracts included licensing fees that would provide steady income. Marcus Chun had donated an additional $50,000 from his battery profits, saying he owed his success to Ghost and wanted to honor that debt. Several of Michael's other innovators had done the same, creating an informal network of former Phoenix recipients who stayed connected and supported new projects. I'd hired 2 part-time staff members, both graduate students who handled administrative work in exchange for access to the workshop and mentorship. The foundation was becoming something larger than Michael's original vision, or perhaps it was becoming exactly what he'd envisioned but hadn't lived long enough to see realized. A self-sustaining ecosystem where innovation bred more innovation, where success compounded and multiplied. Jennifer visited monthly, now less worried, more impressed. She'd started volunteering to review business plans for the innovators, applying her financial expertise to help them understand markets and sustainability. Even she had been pulled into Michael's gravitational field, caught by the possibility of making work mean something beyond profit margins. On the anniversary of Michael's death, I walked through the warehouse alone, touching each workstation, remembering the journey that had brought me here. The woman who'd stood outside in the rain a year ago, broken and lost, barely existed anymore. I'd been rebuilt by this work, by these people, by the daily choice to believe in potential rather than surrender to grief. I'd found Michael's final video file the week before, hidden in a folder I hadn't noticed earlier, labeled for Elena 1 year later. I'd watched it alone in the apartment, crying through his entire message. He'd recorded it the day before he died, barely able to sit upright, but determined to leave me one more piece of guidance. Elena, he'd said, voice barely above a whisper, if you're watching this, you made it through the hardest year. You chose to stay, to try to continue what we started. I knew you would, even when you doubted yourself. You've always been braver than you believed. Everything I built here, I built it with you in mind. Not because I thought you'd want to continue it, but because I knew you were capable of it. You have a gift for seeing people, really seeing them, understanding what they need to flourish. That's rarer than any technical expertise. The foundation will change under your leadership, and that's good. It should evolve, should reflect who you are, not just who I was. Trust your instincts. Take risks on people everyone else overlooks. Remember that failure is part of innovation, both for the projects and for you personally. You'll make mistakes, and that's how you'll learn. Be patient with yourself the way you're patient with the innovators. He'd paused, gathering strength. I love you, Elena. I loved building this life with you. I loved every ordinary Tuesday and every extraordinary crisis. My only regret is not getting to see what you'll accomplish here, but I can imagine it, and it's beautiful. Keep going. Keep believing. Keep creating those ripples. They'll reach farther than you'll ever know. Now, standing in the warehouse on that anniversary, I felt his presence not as grief but as foundation, the bedrock on which everything else was built. He'd given me this impossible gift, this warehouse full of dreams, and I'd learned to carry it. More than that, I'd learned to make it mine. Crystal from the homeless encampment had become an unexpected friend. She'd eventually told me her nephew was Marcus Chan, the battery innovator, and through that connection, Marcus had helped her find housing and employment. She now volunteered at the foundation twice a week, screening initial applications and connecting with innovators from disadvantaged backgrounds. She understood struggle in ways I never would, and her insights had become invaluable. The neighborhood had changed too, or maybe I just learned to see it differently. The coffee shop I'd noticed that first day had become my regular morning spot. The community garden had expanded, partly funded by Jasmine's urban farming project. Even the area's roughness felt less threatening and more authentic, a place where people were rebuilding, creating, surviving against odds. I'd even adopted a dog, an elderly terrier mix someone had abandoned near the warehouse. Michael would have laughed at that, knowing I'd always wanted a dog but he'd been allergic. The dog, whom I'd named Phoenix because I was apparently incapable of subtlety, slept under my desk while I worked and greeted every innovator who walked through the door with enthusiastic, indiscriminate affection. My phone rang, a potential innovator calling about a proposal she'd submitted. I answered professionally, confidently, no longer pretending to know everything but comfortable admitting what I didn't know, and knowing how to find answers. This was my life now, evaluating dreams, making impossible decisions, believing in people, creating space for potential to become reality. The warehouse that had seemed like a punishment, like Michael's final cruel joke, had become my sanctuary. The work I'd thought myself completely unqualified for had become my calling. The future I couldn't imagine had become my present, and it was better than anything I could have planned. Michael had known somehow that I needed this. Not just the work or the purpose but the transformation, the discovery of capabilities I'd never accessed, the growth that only comes from being thrown into deep water and learning you can swim after all. He'd trusted me with his legacy, and in doing so had helped me discover my own. I walked to his photo on the wall, the one of him sitting on Thunder at the ranch right before everything changed, surrounded now by photos of all the innovators Phoenix had supported. "Thank you," I whispered, touching the frame, "for seeing something in me I couldn't see myself. For this impossible gift. For trusting me one last time." Then I turned back to my desk, to Phoenix sleeping underneath, to the applications waiting for review, to the next innovator whose life might change with a single yes. The work continued, the ripples spread, and somewhere, I like to think Michael was smiling, knowing his gamble on me had paid off in ways neither of us could have predicted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.